Good morning, everybody. You're tuned in to Crack Call. Thank you for tuning in today. Today is Tuesday, the 11th of April. So today we're going to be talking about personal responsibility and how that changes the world. Not my words, it's the words of Carl Jung. So basically what he says is that folks, obviously I'm going to paraphrase and add some of my own bits and bobs in it, but the general gist of it is as follows. People's personal responsibility is what will ultimately guide society forward to the next evolutionary stage. You know, and bear in mind the paper that he wrote on this is called what's it called again now? The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. It's an essay that he wrote back in the 60s. Or was it the 50s? I think it might have even been the 50s. But anyway, it wasn't too long after the Second World War had finished. So he's talking a lot about the world back then, obviously. And he's projecting into the future, saying that unless these things happen, the world will end up in a sorry state. He's talking about centralization of power, globalism, and the threat of being ruled by a tyranny. Now, as you can imagine, back then, thoughts like that were fresh in the minds of people, since, you know, Adolf Hitler and stuff was a very recent product of our society. However, isn't it funny how things seem to come back around again? Because it almost seems very, very poignant today, you know. In fact, there's no almost about it. So what he means by personal responsibility is acknowledging in ourselves our ability for good and bad, you know, our potential for evil. In each of us there is this potential, and people nowadays, they call it the shadow. Now that's what he was calling it back then too. So all the integral Zen stuff, I've spoken about some of that on this channel before. They talk about the shadow self, doing shadow work. Well, it's not a new thing. People recognized the shadow back then. Now, what he says is the shadow isn't necessarily a negative aspect of our character. It's not all bad, basically. You know, that's the general gist of it. Because it's the shadow. It's our darker side. The things about ourselves that we choose to hide from ourselves that actually propel us forward, should we acknowledge them. You know, that's his ethos, and it's the truth when you look at how he breaks it down. Now, he basically says that we lie to ourselves on a daily basis because it's more comfortable to do so. It's more comfortable to believe our own personal illusion of ourselves, as opposed to acknowledging every aspect of ourselves, every individual facet. And is that not the truth? Of course it is. We all like to be idealists and believe that our decisions are always for the best. I've been there, I've done it, everybody's done it. We all think to ourselves on occasion that idealistically, you know, and morally, we're in the right. But he says the ego here will play a massive part, because your ego is what will tell you that what you're doing is right, and because you believe it to be right, then it's right, and you're without accountability. So if you can kind of keep the ego in check, what that does is is it allows you to make measured decisions, because subconsciously the ego is always working in the background. So subconsciously you could have motives on your that are promoting your decisions that you're not even aware of, because your ego is hiding them from you. So if you can get past the ego and quell the ego somewhat, then ultimately you'll be able to make measured decisions, because you'll have to question yourself in that moment. You'll question yourself and ask yourself about the decisions you're making, about the things that you're doing and the things that you're saying, and therefore have some form of personal responsibility over that and accountability, because you're pre-checking what it is that you're saying and doing based on any potential subconscious motives that might be driving your decisions in the first place. Now, I find this utterly fascinating personally, because what he also says is that by design, society, whether it be government, religion, they're both kind of two hands of the same demon here. He says what they do is, the way that the system is created as such, the way that it's kind of built, is to give you a person to blame. In religion it's the devil, and in society it's the government. So now everybody's got somebody to blame. They don't have to have personal accountability. Now this is something I've said before anyway, but it's nice to have a little confirmation, because when you look at it a little deeper like Carl Jung does, it all starts to make sense then. You've got a bit more meat to the bones, so to speak. Because what this does then is it stops personal accountability. Most people will do what they've got to do, and they will feel justified based on one reason or another, because in the name of God, so to speak. People will go to war in the name of God. People will go to war in the name of the government, Queen and country. And they will blame the bad shit that happens on the devil. Or they'll say it's God's will. Or they'll say, the government attacked Iraq. Well, no, the government didn't attack Iraq. The people that went out there and shot people dead attacked Iraq. This is as far as we've got at this point in society, is blaming other people for our own actions. So when people feel sanctimonious in themselves and justified, it stops them looking at themselves. And what this does is, again, what like Jung says, by design, as soon as people feel as though they are the ideal, that they've got all the answers, basically, they're not to blame, they're pocket narcissists at this point. And I do truly believe that we've all got a slight percentage of narcissism just cooking away on the back burner somewhere. Some people more than others, of course, a lot more than others. Some people are just literally their narcissistic self, but I think we've all got the potential for everything here. But ultimately, because people have always got this person to blame, they're not accountable, and they've got this idealistic view of themselves, what that means is, and now this is the kicker, what that means is society is ultimately separated and divided as a result, because nobody feels the need to ask for help because they feel like they've got all the answers. Nobody feels the need to want to join with anybody else. Nobody will join hands with somebody else if they feel like somebody else is more stupid than they are, because they've already got the answers. They already know what's going on. You know, so basically what he's saying is this is by design. Now, putting this in the modern sense, because adversely, if people realize from a perspective of humility that they are actually in need, that they don't have all the answers, well, then they're more likely then to unite. And what that does is it creates these little pockets of people that are more likely to come together as a way of survival, as a way of learning, as a way of kind of just the general social structure being of benefit to everybody else, because everybody's coming at it from a perspective of need, because they're not the perfect ideal person. Therefore, you know, they need support. Now, let's just put this in the modern sense right now, because it almost, like I said, it feels like he's explaining what we've just been through and what we're going to be going through, and the potential for the danger if we don't take heed. Because, in my opinion, a massive part of all of this ego-driven non-accountability and idealism of self comes from the virtue signaling. And that is by design, because obviously it's easy to say, well, there's no proof of this. Well, there's your proof. There's no proof of the fact that this is by design, that this is a construct put in place. Well, it is, because there's your proof, man. Because the virtue signaling is put in place. That is by design. The powers that be do actually do that through the fucking bought and paid for media, through the bought and paid for celebrities, so on and so on. The list goes on forever. The amount of people that put out, you know, large corporations that are putting out these virtue signaling messages, what does that do? Well, I termed it fascistic virtuism, because it ultimately brings about a fascistic state, a fascistic mind state. Because now you feel virtuous, and now you can, through that virtuousness, fucking force your opinion on other people, because now you're perfect, you know? So, you know, because you're making the right decisions. He also says that credibility plays a massive part in this, because as soon as people start searching for credibility amongst their peers, they start making their decisions by design as a way to feel credulous within their own friends group or societal fucking pocket, whatever you want to call it. So ultimately, the virtue signaling is that in a nutshell, isn't it? People are searching for credibility amongst their peers by acting a certain way, by doing certain things, by saying certain things. They don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. They want that credibility amongst their friends. And they ultimately, by design, then feel virtuous, therefore unaccountable. And then, what does that do? It shatters society so that nobody will unite. And what are we talking about on this channel more than anything? Globalization, global domination, the fucking takeover of planet Earth systematically. And what do you need in order to accomplish that? Well, you need all of the above, don't you? And it's as simple as that. Now, Jung, he warns that if we don't get past this egotistical, self-satisfying view of ourselves, that we will fall victim to it in a hard way from a great height. And from where I'm sat right now, I don't see much change coming. The world of late has become a very savage place to be. Even though there's more and more people spreading the word about unity and such like, it seems to be a very, very slow process, doesn't it? But he also says, and I'll end on this, even though it may feel tiresome, speaking the word of truth, saying what is needed in society, like a whisper in a crowd, you must still carry on. Because eventually it will make a difference. He says that spiritually and psychically, we're able to make a difference simply by making a difference to ourselves. Because it is known that simply by making a change to yourself in a positive way, it affects those around you. And what else, if not that, do I talk about on this channel, and do a bunch of other people talk about on theirs? Trust me, my friends, that is the way forward. Make a change to yourself positively. Do the work. Don't deny that which resides in you for the potential of badness. Because it's acknowledging that, and acknowledging your whole self, and asking yourself questions and remaining measured, that will give you some personal accountability, which will then give you a sense of self-worth, pride, dignity, and then we're unstoppable. And on that note, from myself and the very great Carl Jung, I mean, it's the first time I've really looked into Carl Jung, and I will say I'll be doing a lot more of it because I think the guy's got a lot to say. There's a reason why these people are held up there as being visionaries, but it just goes to show, and isn't it a tragedy that these people were talking about this stuff and putting it out there, you know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and we're still no further on. The very fact that it still feels like a warning from the past goes to show that the times haven't changed one iota. And that is a tragedy. Because I'm sure that people like Jung would have hoped that in some way their words may have made a difference, their efforts may have made a difference. And who knows, there's still time. Maybe not when it was written, maybe not then, but maybe now. We can take heed. It's all we've got time for. And on that note, I'm going to wish love and peace to all things everywhere. This is Cragcore, signing off. Peace.